The Codec. Why reality is not what you're looking at. Ray Lalonde. Preface. How I got here. There is a room in my house in Brockville where I do most of my thinking. It is not a distinguished room. It has a desk, a lamp that lists slightly to the left, a window that looks onto a backyard where a single oak tree grows. The tree is large enough that in summer its canopy fills most of the frame, and in winter its bare branches make a pattern against the sky that I have spent a great deal of time looking at without ever quite meaning to. The room is where this book happened. I mention the room not because it is interesting, but because it is ordinary. And the question this book addresses came to me in the most ordinary way possible. I was sitting at the desk, looking at the oak tree through the window, and something about the looking stopped making sense. I don't mean this as a dramatic statement. I mean it precisely. The act of looking, of sitting in a room and receiving through two small organs a vivid, detailed, apparently immediate experience of a tree began, under examination, to become strange in a way I couldn't account for with the standard explanations. I had read the standard explanations. The brain is not a passive receiver. Perception is constructive. The mind imposes structure on sensation. These are all true, and I had no quarrel with any of them. But there was something underneath the standard explanations that they didn't address. All of them seemed to treat what I was seeing, the specific quality of the afternoon light on the bark, the way the branches moved, as a version of what was actually there. Filtered perhaps, distorted perhaps, shaped by evolutionary history and cognitive architecture and neural shortcuts. But still, underneath all of that, a version of it, a representation. Something on the output side that corresponded in some diminished or distorted form to something on the input side. I started asking what kind of thing that correspondence was, and the more carefully I looked, the harder I found it to locate. The claim I ended up with, the claim this book is organized around, is not that perception is inaccurate or distorted or limited. Those claims are all true, but they are not what I am arguing for. The claim is that the relationship between the physical world and conscious experience is not the kind of relationship that accuracy or distortion or limitation can even describe. It is a different kind of relationship entirely, one of categorical translation between ontologically incompatible formats. This sounds technical, and I will spend several chapters making it precise. But the core idea is not technical. Consider a film stored on a hard drive. The data on the drive consists of ones and zeros. The film consists of images, sound, music, narrative, emotional resonance. These two things, the binary data and the film experience, bear no intrinsic resemblance to one another. The connection between them is entirely the product of a codec, a translation architecture that converts one format into another so completely that nothing about the final experience reflects the format of what it was generated from. The ones and zeros don't look like anything. They don't sound like anything. The codec makes something from them, something real, something vivid, something that genuinely moves you, that has no common format with the data it was made from. I am proposing that this is what perception is, not an analogy for it, a description of it. The electromagnetic signals, the pressure waves, the chemical gradients that constitute the physical world bear the same relationship to conscious experience that binary data bears to the film it encodes. They are the generating source, and the experience is the output, and nothing about the output shares a common format with the source. The color red does not exist, attenuated or distorted, in the electromagnetic radiation at 700 nanometers. It does not exist there at all. Remove every perceiving organism from the universe, and the radiation is still there, undiminished, exactly as it was. The redness is gone. Not hidden, not dormant. Gone. The philosophical tradition has been building toward this conclusion for a long time. Kant saw the gap between appearance and underlying reality with more rigor than anyone before him, and his account remains the most serious attempt to think through what it means to know a world that the mind's own apparatus has structured. The predictive processing framework in neuroscience has, over the past 2 decades, converged on a picture of perception as active construction rather than passive reception. Donald Hoffman's interface theory argues from evolutionary biology that perceptual systems don't track truth, but fitness. Aldous Huxley, standing in his garden in 1953, with the floodgates open and the reducing valve switched off, reported seeing something he could not account for within ordinary categories. I am indebted to all of these. But there is a claim they share, a structural assumption embedded so deeply in the standard accounts that it has rarely been named as an assumption that I think is mistaken, and that matters. All of these accounts treat the relationship between physical substrate and conscious experience as one of representation: accurate, inaccurate, filtered, distorted, fitness optimized, but representation. They assume there is a common evaluative framework in which the output can be assessed against the input for fidelity or correspondence. A filter retains a subset of the signal. A misrepresentation departs from a standard. Both presuppose a shared format in which signal and experience can be compared. The codec framework's central claim is that no such shared format exists. The output and the input belong to categorically different ontological types. The question of whether the experience of red accurately represents electromagnetic radiation at 700 nanometers is not a question with a hidden answer. It is a malformed question. Accuracy requires a common currency. The codec produces no common currency. The difference between this claim and the standard accounts is the difference between a locked room, one that investigation might eventually open, and a room that cannot be described in any language available inside the building. The kernel thesis, which follows directly from the codec framework, holds that the physical substrate from which conscious experience is generated is not merely unknown, but structurally inaccessible. Not because it is too complex, or too far away, or insufficiently studied, but because every cognitive tool available for studying it was built within and calibrated against the render that the codec produces, and none of those tools has any architecture for what lies outside that render. A word about what this book is not claiming, because the claim is strong enough that I need to be careful about where its edges are. This book is not arguing that perception is unreliable. The render is extraordinarily reliable. It has been calibrated by 4 billion years of evolution for exactly the tasks it performs, and it performs them with a precision that no engineering effort has come close to matching. The apple on the table is there. The car coming toward me is there. The face of the person I love is there, rendered with a fidelity that supports everything I need to do in relation to it. None of this is in question. This book is not arguing that the physical world does not exist. The electromagnetic radiation is there. The molecular structures are there. The quantum states are there. The codec framework is agnostic about the ultimate nature of what generates the render. The kernel thesis holds precisely that any claim about the kernel's nature is beyond what can be established from within the render. What the framework insists on is that the physical world and the experiential world are in categorically incompatible formats, and that this fact has consequences for what can and cannot be known. This book is not the simulation hypothesis. I am not arguing that we are in a computer simulation, or that reality is fundamentally computational, or that there is a programmer somewhere making choices about the laws of physics. Those are interesting ideas, but they are not the ideas in this book. The codec framework does not require any particular account of the kernel's nature. It is compatible with any such account or with no account at all. The claim is structural, not cosmological. The argument in this book was developed in academic papers before it was developed here. The paper format requires a kind of argument that is dense, compressed, calibrated for readers who are already inside the relevant philosophical conversations. What the book format permits, what I have tried to use it for, is a different kind of argument, one that can slow down at the difficult moments, revisit key claims from multiple angles, and stay close to the concrete experience that the philosophical abstractions are about. The apple on the table never disappears from this book. The oak tree outside the window is still there on the last page. The philosophical machinery is built to account for specific, vivid, ordinary experiences of looking at things, not to float free of them. The book is organized in 4 parts, plus a preface and epilogue. Part 1 establishes the problem: what perception science and philosophy have established about the nature of perceptual experience, and why the standard accounts of what that means fall short. Part 2 develops the codec framework in full, the positive account of perception as categorical translation, its relationship to Kant and inactivism in Hoffman, its formal grounding, and the structural model of nested reality that the framework generates. Part 3 develops the kernel thesis through 3 independent arguments, and then examines its most surprising application: the anomalous perceptual phenomena, unidentified aerial objects, collective false memories, cryptid sightings, that the framework both reframes and illuminates. Part 4 draws out implications for dreams, artificial minds, the mechanism by which levels of reality give rise to one another, and what it means to inhabit a render you cannot see past. The reader who wants only the central philosophical argument can follow chapters 1 through 6, chapter 10, and the epilogue. The reader who wants the full formal treatment should read chapter 9. The reader interested in the scientific convergence should read chapter 4 and return to it after reading part 3. But the book is designed to be read straight through because the argument builds, and what part 4 implies depends on what part 3 establishes, which depends on what part 2 grounds, which depends on what part 1 earns. I have been sitting with this question for a long time. It started in the room with the oak tree outside the window. It has not resolved in the way that questions in mathematics resolve, with a proof that closes the matter and permits you to move on. It has resolved in the way that philosophical questions resolve when they go well, with a framework that locates the difficulty precisely, that shows where the boundary between the knowable and the unknowable actually falls, and that changes your relationship to both sides of that boundary. The side that can be known turns out to be deeper and stranger than the naive picture suggested. The side that cannot be known turns out to be genuinely inaccessible in a way that is not a counsel of despair, but a precise description of the situation we are in. That situation is the subject of this book. I'm going to try to describe it as clearly as I can. The oak tree is still outside the window. The afternoon light is still doing what it does to the bark. What that means, what is happening in that moment of looking, is what this book is about.